Recording.
Lovely. Good evening, everybody. And as Trudy says, thank you so much for being here with us when it is so warm. We do really appreciate it. I have a feeling that if I try and make this full screen, I'm not going to be able to see you. So can everybody see that as it is at the moment? Is that,
Yep. We can.
yeah, lovely? Because what I don't want to do is you disappear from me. So tonight's topic is incel awareness. Now, this is something that has been on our radar for a while, actually. And it's something that we work with schools and colleges on. And until this point, actually, it's been staff training and working with older young people, so those in colleges and universities. However, since the show Adolescence came out on Netflix, it seems to have absolutely blown up. Can I just check? Can you still see my slides? Because it's not telling me it's sharing.
You know,
Yes.
yep.
You can see those. And if I change to the next one, can you still see those?
Yeah.
Yes. Ah, great. It's not got the red line. That's quite odd. Thank you. So after Adolescence came out, we were bombarded with questions, as were leaders in schools, around what is this? What is incel? Why didn't we know about it? And what are all these terms that are floating around? Now, hopefully, for many primary children, it will be absolutely out of their sphere of consciousness. It's not something that they'll be coming across. However, it would be probably unfair for us not to prep ourselves with the knowledge just in case it should pop up, especially for those slightly older primary children who are looking at going to secondary school fairly soon. Okay, so as parents, it's really important we're armed, which is why I'm so glad to see so many of you here with us tonight. So what would be really lovely before we get going, can you very quickly, Trudy, you'll have a better view of everybody, so it might be best if you can ask names. Just let us know which schools your children go to. Or if you want to do that in the chat, whatever works best. Trudy, what do you think?
Chat. It's always great to know
Yeah.
which parents from which schools that we've got here this evening. So if you put it in the chat, I'll make a note. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. It
Great.
just gives us a really good oversight. And for those of you that haven't seen us before, because this is our third session, but I know not everybody can make all of them. We're safeguarding specialists. We work within the education sector primarily. Between us, we've got over 20 years experience as safeguarding leaders, and we're really passionate actually about championing children, parents, and the educators across the country that are working with our children and young people. We're absolutely there as a critical friend, so we're very supportive, but are not shy from pointing out when things could be even better. And I'm really pleased that the uptake for these sessions has been so positive from schools, obviously getting parents on board, making sure you're as equipped to safeguard as they are in school. So today, we're looking at what the term incel means and how the movement's developed. It's not new in the truest sense, but it is absolutely being talked about more than ever. We're looking at the online spaces where the culture exists. We're looking at the language and the warning signs that you should be aware of. Now, all I can tell you is this is what we know right now. Incel, as much as so many other safeguarding topics, is evolving all of the time. And if we were to revisit this training in 12 months, or even to have done it 12 months ago, possibly some of the language we talked about would have been slightly different. So please just bear that in mind. We can tell you that as of right now, it's completely accurate. However, these things are evolving, and we'd really encourage you to kind of keep an eye on the ball there. And then, of course, we're looking at how you can support and protect your child from what effectively is actually online radicalisation. So it's these things that they can see online and be drawn into because they won't necessarily have the understanding of risk in the same way that we will. Okay, so we talked about adolescence. By a show of hands, kind of either real hands or by your Zoom hands, how many people have seen adolescence? Be really good to know. Ah, okay. So I can see one, which is really interesting. It is at two, three, lovely. It's it's a difficult watch. I think it's fair to say. It's really tricky to watch. I watched it with my safeguarding professional hat on, but actually found it incredibly difficult as a mum of a preteen. It really hit hard. I would recommend you watch it, but please know that it does come with that warning. So the show focuses on a young boy who becomes involved in online communities, and it's about him Actually being enticed by the incel ideology. So around the idea that he, and we'll come on to this, but he maybe wouldn't be able to get a girlfriend, he's rejected in friendship groups, etc. And what the show does beautifully is highlights how vulnerable young people can be so easily drawn into these spaces. And actually, as our children get older, they maybe don't always share with us as much as we would like. And children are using the internet more and more, as we talked about in our last session, if you were here. And so actually they might seek support in other places. And sometimes, even if we are super good at monitoring them, telling them what they can and can't access, let's not be naive to the fact that if they really want to, they can get onto things that we don't necessarily encourage them to access. Okay? So what does incel mean? So it stands for involuntary celibate, okay? And it's really around individuals, and it is typically young men who feel rejected by women. So they feel that they can't form romantic or sexual relationships, but that ultimately this isn't their fault. This is the fault of the women, because women are only drawn to certain types of men. They're not the right type of men, and that ultimately women should be punished for this. Hugely misogynistic and hugely damaging, actually. And not only damaging in the long term, but damaging in their kind of day-to-day conversations around maybe female classmates, female members of staff, and even mums, sisters, aunts, etc. at home. I've worked with one parent whose child was really, really drawn into this, and the damage that it played in the house was huge. This wasn't just kind of playground meanness. This really did impact family life. Okay. So
Hmm.
at its core, oh, sorry, Anthony, did you have something to say there?
No, no, no,
Oh,
no.
no, no problem. So what does incel mean? So at its core, the incel system believes we're blaming women. Okay, this isn't the man's fault, the boy's fault, this is the woman's fault. It sees attractiveness as something that's fixed by genetics. So the idea is if people don't find you attractive, they never will. That's the bottom line, that's how it is. And it often leads to feelings of anger, loneliness, and resentment. Now, the problem we have here is when people find an online culture that supports this, it can almost cause that snowball effect. So rather than a child coming to us as parents and saying, look, I'm feeling this way, and we can have that conversation with them and help them to feel more supported, actually some of these toxic online spaces are almost encouraging those feelings. They're encouraging it. They're creating huge amounts of stress and anxiety and drama around these feelings. And then, of course, we know that that can lead to really inappropriate behaviours and thoughts, actually. So, why should we be concerned? Okay, why should we need to know about this? Incel community is so often online now. Okay, our children can stumble across it even if they're not looking for it. And at its core, we're looking at hatred towards women, self-pity and hopelessness, discussions of violence and revenge, and then things like racism and antisocial behaviour. So there's that absolute encouragement of things that we just wouldn't expect or accept. Okay, it can be really, really toxic. And actually, for those young people that are feeling lonely and isolated, if they find a group online that they identify with, that becomes even more dangerous because they're much more likely to listen to what's being said and these ideas that are being fed in. Okay. So, of course, not every child will encounter this. Please don't go away tonight feeling terrified about your children being online. It's really just about letting you know that it is out there. So, incel content can be found on social media. We know, we've talked in the past, I don't know if all of you are here, but TikTok, there's really limited constraints on TikTok. You can watch one video, it takes you to another, to another, to another. Once you've looked at content that has any links at all to incel community and culture, the algorithms are likely to show us more and more and more. So if all of us pulled up a Facebook feed or a YouTube feed or whatever it may be tonight now, we'd all be seeing different things. And that may be to do with things we've clicked on that are political or news stories or certain authors that we might be interested in or actors or actresses. And it absolutely targets what we've looked at before. Okay. So that means if a child stumbles on something once or twice, that's the information that they'll be fed through their news feeds, through their home pages. Okay. What that then does is almost isolates that as, this is how it is. This is how it is because this is everything I'm seeing. You know, they're not being given a broad spectrum of points. They're being given the same thing over and over again, just from different places. Okay. So forums and group chats, I don't know if any of you have ventured onto Reddit, but Reddit has a whole sub-community around the incel community. Now, there was it was a huge part of Reddit many years ago, and I actually believe it got closed down, but it would be naive to assume that nothing else had opened up. Okay, so let's just be really mindful of the fact that once you get in that rabbit hole, it really can snowball. And then gaming communities as well. And this isn't, we ran the parent workshop on gaming, and I was the first to say, for any of you that are there, actually it can be really positive. It can be a really lovely place, a really wonderful sense of community for children who enjoy gaming. But actually, some people who game might do it because in their real lives, they do struggle to form relationships and bonds. And actually, for those people, it may be that they are sharing their thoughts around this misogyny, and that incel community. So it may well look harmless. So often incel content is disguised as jokes and memes. If you wish, you can kind of pop incel joke, incel meme into Google and see what comes up. I did it the other day out of interest. There are huge and huge amounts of images that you could just share at the click of a button. I elected not to put any in the training, even just to illustrate the point, but you are very welcome to go and have a look. Has anyone got any questions at this point before we move on? No. If you do, you're very welcome to use the chat as well. I know Trudy's monitoring the chat, so I can't see if that's been used yet, but you're very welcome to pop thoughts in there as we go. Okay, thank you. So, the rise of incel culture online has a huge risk to young children. So, children, especially aged 7 to 11, we know statistically are likely to use things such as YouTube, gaming communities. We touched on Roblox before, all these places that have a freedom of speech around the chat, around talking on headphones. What we can't know if we can't hear who they're talking to is who is speaking to our child and what are they saying to them. Okay, so please let's not think, oh, mine are too young for this, because actually, just because they're too young, it doesn't mean the people that they're linking up online with are necessarily too young. Okay, typically it would have been older young people, so maybe late teens, early adulthood, but we know that children are using the internet younger and younger and younger, and it's just about being really aware of those risks. Okay, so what would we look for? How could it impact our child? How would we know? Of course, we will always advocate for watching your children online, making sure you know what they're accessing. However, we also know we don't live in a perfect world, and sometimes you'll need to step away. There'll be things to be done. Let's not pretend that children only and always in every household get supervised internet time. That's not always the case. Okay, so you might notice that they're making harsh comments or sexist comments about girls or women. This might be in general, or it could actually be quite targeted. So somebody that they're at school with, it could be somebody in the family, it could be somebody that they know outside of school. It's just something to be really aware of. Using unfamiliar slang like beans or black pill. Now we're going to come on to explain what these means. And then what I'll also do is when we send the link of the recording out to schools, we'll send out a link to our website that's got a page where the emojis are explained. Now, they do come with the same disclaimer from the start of the session, where right now we know this is what is being used, but ultimately it can change and it will change. So it's just something to bear in mind. Okay. Being secretive about their internet use. Now, many children don't have smartphones, but some do. And actually, if they're using data out and about, we can't always know what they're looking at. They'll be spending more time online, maybe even in chat forums or on anonymous apps. They may be expressing feelings of hopelessness, frustration, and anger, and they may also be showing hostility towards relationships. And again, this can be inside the family unit as well, which can be really, really hurtful. What I would say is often young people, especially as we head towards puberty, will be showing signs of hostility towards certain people, or maybe feeling a little bit frustrated or a little bit angry. I'm not saying that those signs absolutely mean your child is accessing incel culture. Not necessarily at all, but let's just be aware that it is there as a possibility. So over to you, and I've touched on a few. Does anybody know the meaning of these words? So we've got Chad, Stacey, the manosphere, black pill, rope or roping, and go ER. Does anybody know what they may mean? Or does anybody want to hazard a guess? I'm conscious it's very hot. It's the end of your day. You're all probably thinking, why is she throwing this out to us? But if anybody's got anything they do want to share, please do feel free. Otherwise, I'm very happy to move on to the meanings. Nicola, please.
Yeah, I think Chad is a sort of seen as a typically good-looking male who gets a lot of women.
Absolutely. It absolutely is. Thank you, Nicola, for sharing that. And actually, the risk with the, I think so. With the risk of being wrong, that was really lovely. But you weren't wrong. That was spot on. Thank you.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Is Stacey an unintelligent woman?
An unintelligent woman. Okay, let's have a look. So it's interesting you say that, Anthony, because actually it's an attractive, desirable woman. However, you're not wrong, because in some strands of the manosphere, which we'll come on to explain in a moment, actually unintelligent women are seen as the desirable ones. Because actually, if we've got the narrative of incel, potentially the unintelligent women are less likely to argue, less likely to fight back, more likely to be quite placid. So yes, you absolutely are right there. So you right.
TV program, Stacey, was it Stacey and something or other?
Gavin and Stacey.
Yeah, yeah, sort of Essex type thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
I've never made that connection before.
that's
That's
what.
good. I wonder if that's where it's come from. But no, yeah, you're absolutely right. So thank you so much. So we've got Chad as our attractive, confident man and a Stacey as our attractive, desirable woman. The manosphere, so it refers to the realms of the internet which promote misogyny. And we'll hear children talking about this. And just be mindful that just because they're using the words doesn't necessarily mean that they know what they mean. They've heard them. They may have heard them on the playground. They may have heard them on Roblox. They may have heard them online. They don't necessarily know what they mean or fully understand what they mean. Okay, so black pill, the belief that certain people are doomed to failure because of genetics. Rope and roping is a reference to suicide. And then GOER refers to mass violence inspired by real life attackers. So there have been real life attacks that have been linked back to incel. Okay. And of course, if we know these signs, we can spot them a little bit sooner. So the manosphere, a term used to describe the websites, forums, and the spaces online where people talk about male identity, frustrations in society. And as I said before, some can be supportive or at least veiled in supportiveness. However, actually what they're supporting is quite toxic and quite dangerous. Okay. They often spread hateful ideas about women and blame feminism for all of men's problems. And they can really encourage young men to feel that anger and really share in that anger. And that can be so, so dangerous. Again, both in those family units or personal relationships, but in the more general sense of being in the big wide world as well. Okay. So we've mentioned emojis. I will send you the link to a much more comprehensive list, but I've just picked out a few here. And you might notice your children using emojis. Now, I can confirm that when I put the emoji fact sheet together that I'll direct you to, me and Trudy had a little bit of a little, oh, goodness me, like we've been using these, but we've been using them to mean something completely different. We've got the coffee cup here. I would send that quite often, but it's not because I've got an interest in incel. So just because you see these on your child's phone or in their communication, please don't panic, but let's just be aware. So we've got the 100% emoji. Now, this is used really frequently by young people anyway, to kind of go, yeah, I completely agree. But actually, in terms of incel culture, it can be used to identify the thought that women, on the whole, only want to date the top 20% of men. So it's kind of saying, of 100% of men, 80% of us are doomed. We're doomed to never be in a romantic relationship. They don't want us. They only want that kind of cream of the crop at the very top. Okay. Coffee and beans. So these are used to identify each other online. So it's almost a way of saying, look, I know what incel is. I know about incel. But of course, in the case of myself and Trudy, it was a case of saying like, oh, goodness, that was a late night. I'm going to have a coffee. So let's just be really mindful that they can be used in all innocence. Okay. We've got the pill emoji. So this often refers to the idea of being red pilled. And this is something else that you may hear. We've talked about black pill. But the idea of a red pill is that somebody would choose to take that. So I don't know if you've seen the film The Matrix, but the idea with the red pill is if you take the red pill, you see the truth. You see everything for real, as it really is, without this veil across your eyes. Now, in the incel culture, people who aren't red pill are deemed to be blue pill, and they don't really understand it because they don't think that women only want 20% of men. They don't think that we're all doomed to fail, so they would identify as being red pilled while everybody else is blue pill. However, the red pill's also linked to the idea that men are victims, that women are manipulative, and that society as a whole is unfair to boys and men. And it's just a way of getting people to really join in on that mindset. Okay. So often tonight, I've already talked about, this is what we should keep an eye out for. This is what you may see. But actually, you having this knowledge gives you a really lovely opportunity to talk to your children, especially if they are that little bit older and the top end of primary. You can have that conversation of, what are you seeing online? What are you? Because sometimes, and I'm guilty of this sometimes too, as a parent, we think, well, if they've not told us, they don't know. And I don't want to tell them about it because I don't want to open that can of worms, let children be children. And I completely get that. But actually, with this knowledge, we can have those gentle conversations about, have you seen anything online that maybe makes you feel a bit worried or a bit uncomfortable? And it might be that they go, no, what are you talking about? But then as we have those conversations and they know they can approach us, it becomes a little bit easier. So how incel can escalate. Although many people that see this content online don't go on to become violent, they don't go on to become mass attackers. And actually, for some, it's arguably a phase of, I'm very frustrated. This is something that I'm attaching it to. And then they move on. For some, it can turn into radicalisation and it can lead to committing acts of violence, typically targeted at women. Women, sorry. Not only the acts of violence, of course, which are damaging, but also the impact on your child's mental health and their self-esteem and their view of themselves, because fundamentally the incel culture is rooted in the belief that we are worthless. I am worthless. And that as kind of an ingrained mentality is so damaging. And of course, there are links to things like self-harm, depression, suicidal ideology. And that is not something that just happens overnight. I'm not saying, goodness me, if your child sees something online, we really need to panic. We don't. But what we do need to do is be aware of it and be supportive. Okay. So the risks. Risks include exposure to misogyny and hatred. So, of course, we've got that deep resentment towards women, which leads on to them blaming them for personal frustrations. So we do get to the point where for incel men, everything is the fault of a woman, whether that's an identified woman, their wife, their mother, or women in general. And then, of course, children can internalize these attitudes. What I would say that I see firsthand fairly frequently, actually, is where we've got dads or father figures in households who have these skewed views and this misogynistic attitude. We see it in children. I can think of a few cases in particular where I've kind of read reports about children or spoken to school staff around children. And we know that actually it's because that is modelled in the home. So all I would really encourage is just that. And I'm sure it's absolutely happening in all of your homes anyway. But that equality, that praise, it's not a case of we've got strict gender roles and women are this and men are this. It's about that openness. Okay. So then we've got radicalisation and extremism. So it can serve as a gateway into more extreme ideologies, so far right or violent extremist groups. Again, this is the top end of the scale. I'm really not trying to terrify anybody at all. But going back to what I said earlier, sometimes young people, especially if they're isolated or feeling vulnerable, can easily be drawn in. If they want that sense of belonging, they will be drawn in. And it's the same as kind of gang culture. County lines, all of those things. If young people are feeling that they don't identify with anyone, but suddenly find this cohort of people online that really understand them, it's so easy to take on those beliefs and allow them to become part of who you are, because the reward from that is that feeling of acceptance. Okay. So we've got the mental health impacts. These spaces often glorify depression and hopelessness. So as I said, it's all about we're useless. I'm useless. And this can, of course, impact self-esteem, anxiety. And I know we've touched on this, but I just think it's so important. If children are feeling low, let's have those open conversations with them. How can we support you? Who can support you? It might not always be something that has to be handled at home in its entirety. Schools are really good. I know, of course, we work with the schools that your children are at, and they're all so good at supporting children, nurturing mental health, and working with families as well. Please don't ever feel that you're on your own. Fenella, yes, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I'm just wondering about something you raised a few sentences ago. this obviously comes from a place of very low self-esteem, and it's obviously different to the idea of the macho man who
Mm,
is feeling, or boy who's feeling kind of strong and dominant, and that women are weaker or lesser beings.
mm,
This it seems to turn this on its head and um, suggests that the boy or the man is feeling very um, kind of useless, and as though his impact on the world or his friends is very small and insignificant.
mm.
Um, I suppose I'm thinking about traditional kind of male dominance in society being not that, but something which thinks of men being stronger and women being weaker, but it's not that at all, is it?
No, not necessarily. And actually, so much of the incel culture and the misogyny comes in revenge. So it's steeped in revenge. It's, the way of the world is targeted towards women. Women are seen as superior. It's not necessarily they believe that they are, but they're seen as superior by the world, by community, and we want to assert our dominance in that way. So it's that revenge for the total injustice of the whole situation. Does that make sense?
It does.
It was a really good point that you made, though. Thank you. It's a really good point because it does turn it on its head, actually. It does. Um,
It's quite different to, what's actually real, because, that might be a perception, obviously, by some young men that are struggling with self-esteem, but in the majority of the world, men are seen as having the kind of stronger, successful positions in
mhm.
society, aren't they? Traditionally, and maybe they can't connect or identify with
And I think
that
that's
perception.
maybe, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. And it's really interesting actually, because none of us can say for certain, I certainly can't say for certain, why do people have these thoughts? I don't have these thoughts. So why do people have them? And there's been numerous studies done, but I suppose none of us can ever know for certain. But I do wonder if it's exactly what you've just said. The world still paints a picture of male dominance, and the men are the breadwinners and the men are physically stronger. And actually, for these young men, they can't identify with that. They
Mm,
can't identify with being stronger or richer or better for all intents and purposes, and so they're angry.
right. Thank
They're
you. Thank
angry. No, thank you. That was really useful. Has anybody else got anything to say before we move on?
you.
Emma, Amy's
Yeah.
just posed a really good question in the chat, making the point that although we're focusing very specifically on males this evening and incel culture,
Mm,
she's asking, is there a similar culture, and perhaps a community of females online or elsewhere who are misandrist? Now, this isn't something that we tend to come across in our
mm,
safeguarding work. So we
no.
work with schools and colleges and universities across the country, both in training, but also in quite intimate one-to-one discussions with their designated safeguarding leads about what safeguarding issues they are managing. And we support with that to help them to reflect on and manage particular safeguarding cases. And it's a great question. I can't think of a single one that has come up in the last few years that we've been supporting so many people. However, what some young men and boys, what I can hear in some of the things that they say in those settings is that almost kind of there's a perception that feminism has gone too far,
Mm,
um, and
Mm,
and that it's that fostering ideas which are very anti-men. But that's something which is coming more from the males themselves in response to their perception of certain societal and economic movements, rather than something that we are aware of as a cluster of women. But it is something that we will, you've asked a brilliant question, we will kind of stay attuned to, because
mm.
it's a really interesting point.
Yeah, it is. Thank you for that. Was that Amy, did you say?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, thank
great
you, Amy.
question.
That's brilliant. It has made me think actually, and it's not necessarily as severe as what we're talking about tonight, but we do see, don't we, sometimes, and it's almost what I've just touched on, certain attitudes are modelled in households, and actually it's very easy to get an idea of what those attitudes are through the children, and I think that that's a risk actually sometimes, and that can be one way or the other. So it's a really good point, thank you. Right, let's have a look. Am I still sharing? It's still not telling me I am, so
Yes.
thank you. I've not got the line. It's very strange. So, incels and those who believe in the incel culture promote the idea that attractiveness and social status are fixed and that dating success is just impossible for some. So it's not a case of I haven't met anybody yet that's attracted to me. It's a case of I never will and I cannot and it will not happen. So this view undermines resilience and healthy coping strategies, and it makes teens more prone to giving up. So rather than having that personal growth, that social development, getting out there and meeting new people, actually it's just that attitude of, well, it's never going to happen for me. I'm not going to try. And actually that can be really stunting in the development of preteens and teenagers. And it's something that as parents, we really do need to look out for. Of course, all teenagers will have those wobbles and those crises of confidence and those moments of, oh my goodness, am I good enough? And it's about supporting them through that and actually not letting them get to the point where they're finding that support elsewhere, because of course that could end up being quite damaging. So normalization of toxic online behavior. What we don't want is our children to be spending time in online spaces where they just accept kind of online harassment and online abuse as being normal. Because as soon as that becomes normalized for them on the internet, there's every chance that will seep into their real life as well. And that kind of behavior and attitude will show up in their everyday interactions. So it's really important that we don't desensitize our young people to those really harmful attitudes and behaviors online, because the more they see them, the more normal they become. And it's about stepping in and saying, actually, no. And having those conversations, there's no benefit in just telling a young person, no, that is wrong, you should not look at it. Actually, it's that conversation of, what led you to that? What do you think? What do you think? And then you can carefully guide them through those conversations. And I appreciate, as a mum, I'm saying this with a real idealistic view of the world, and they'll go, oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Mum. I love that. And we know it might not always be that simple, but knowing that they can have that open and honest dialogue with you is absolutely the most vital starting point, so that they don't feel that they need to keep things secret. So we've got potential for violence. Now, I don't know if you remember the news stories. We've got Elliot Rodger and Alec Minassian. I can never say his surname. That's really... Trudy, do you know how to pronounce his surname? Just have that moment.
Alec Minassian, I think.
Yes. Thank you. And why not all incels are violent? There have been real world attacks and they've been absolutely highlighted in the news as well. Now, of course, exposure to these communities can desensitize young people. Of course, it's important that we share what's going on in the world, but what we don't want to do is normalize these horrors, okay? And actually, when it is in the news, it can almost create sympathy for those who commit it. So we worked with a school a while ago where they'd had young boys, I think they were year 5 and 6, talking about Andrew Tate, and they were talking about he was great because he got a really fast car and he could go wherever he wants and he eats what he wants and he drinks what he wants and he's always on holiday. Now, actually, so much of what Andrew Tate shares with the world through his social media is so misogynistic, so damaging, and young people are seeing this and just idealizing it because he's living this, wonderful life, or was. And so it's just really important to be mindful about what news are your young people seeing. And going back to the algorithms, like I said at the start, if they're seeing a certain spin on news stories and are engaging with that, that's ultimately what they'll be fed. So they won't be fed various viewpoints and then make their own mind up. They'll be fed one viewpoint. And to a young brain, this is how it is, because this is how everybody's telling me it is. Okay, just be really mindful. So what's the attraction? We've said if young people are feeling lonely or misunderstood or socially awkward, and especially during puberty and those later years of primary school, it can feel like a refuge. And I know I've hit this point home so many times, but I just think it's so important. We give children a little bit more freedom as they get older online, and it's just about making sure that they're using it in the way that we expect and anticipate that they are using it. What we don't want, although we don't want to, stop them making friends and communicating with people, we don't want them to just find refuge in those toxic communities online, because that can be so, so damaging. So how can we protect our child? And I've kind of peppered this through, and that's not because, we don't want to do this slide, but it's actually because it's so important and it comes up all of the time. So we start those conversations. Whatever comes up from your child, whenever they're doing something, whenever they want to talk, have those open-ended conversations. What have you been doing online? Who do you talk to? What kind of things have you seen? And you can even share with them, if you've been scrolling through the news or something. So I've seen this. I've seen this. What have you seen? And it's about being curious and not being judgmental. So it's not a case of like, oh, what have you been looking at now? What rubbish have you been doing on the internet now? It's about that curiosity. We're living in a digital age. We're all on phones, on tablets, on computers, so much of the time. We're all sat on laptops now. And it's so important that children feel that they can come to us openly and that they don't need to hide it and be secretive. So if they mention something you don't understand, ask them. They're our best teachers, okay? So much of what we share with parents and schools comes from children, because it has to, because they're the ones that know. We don't know the emojis that they're using, they do. And in 12 months, if we refresh this training, I can't make it up. I need to ask them, because they know more than we do, okay? And then teach media literacy. So, of course, let's help our children to understand that not everything they see is true. We don't have to believe everything we see on the internet. It goes back to, when I was at school, I'd get from my mum, well, if so-and-so told you to jump off a bridge, would you do it? It's the same now, actually, isn't it? But it's online. Just because somebody's saying it's true, do we necessarily have to believe it's true? Or actually, can we work together to explore this? Can we see what other viewpoints there are online? Can we make our own informed decision rather than just taking it as read because it was on TikTok? Okay. Set boundaries. So if you were on our last session, we went through setting boundaries, parental controls on app usage, on screen time, and again, having that safe space. So even if a child feels uncomfortable or embarrassed or worried about something they've seen online, make it so clear that they can come to you. And you know what? If it's uncomfortable for them, it's probably going to be uncomfortable for you as well. But it's much better to have that uncomfortable conversation now than 6 months down the line, when they really actually have started to process these thoughts and ideas. So, when to raise a concern. I said earlier, this isn't something that you have to handle on your own. Of course, your children are your biggest concern. I completely understand that, but let people help you. If you know that your child is using, for example, hate-based language, they're talking about violence, they're showing signs of radicalisation, of course, talk to them, but please, please, please also reach out to the child's school. Let them know what's happening. It may be that there's been a conversation in the classroom that has sparked this. Maybe that's conversations in the playground in which the school really need to be involved and to know. Reach out to a safeguarding professional. You're all very, very welcome to contact us at any time. You've got our contact details. We're very receptive to that. And then, of course, if there's serious concern or danger, and we really are talking, you think your child or somebody else's child has been radicalised to the point where actually there may be incentive for violence, you can call the prevent team. Now, the prevent team take referrals from anywhere. So they take them from the public, they take them from educators, they take them from all different professions. And then what they do is they review that referral, and then they will decide if that young person needs some tailored support. So it goes to something called a channel panel, which is a team of professionals who will decide, what does this child need? How can we best give it to them? And then with parental consent, if they're under 18, that support package will be put into place. Okay. If they refuse that support, then the police keep an eye so they know what's going on. But just please don't worry. If no criminal offence has been committed, making that referral to prevent doesn't get anybody in any trouble. It's not about getting people in trouble. It's about putting that support in early enough before they do something that actually would completely change the course of their life. Okay. So final thoughts. So many young people will go through these periods that may kind of trigger us a little bit. They may feel anxious. They may be lacking self-confidence. They may be frightened, they may feel quite awkward, they may feel that they don't want to talk to us. This doesn't necessarily mean anything untoward is going on, but your involvement in those conversations is so, so vital to making sure things don't escalate. So have that open dialogue, okay? It's the very first step in keeping your children safe. I'm conscious that we're a few minutes before time, which isn't necessarily awful when it is so warm, because I really appreciate you all sitting here and listening to me tonight. But what we did want to just let you know is our next session will be taking place on the 5th of June, slightly earlier time at 5 p.m. And it's setting healthy boundaries and staying safe outside of school. Now, the reason I'm drawing your attention to this tonight is because if a school has a parent here tonight and then the same parent there again on the next session, they'll be entered into a draw to win this programme for free next year. So it's just a way of giving something back to the school. So if you are here tonight and you manage to meet us again on the 5th of June, please make yourself known to us and let us know that you've come to both, and actually, yes, your school do need to be entered into that draw, and we'd be really, really happy to do that. Okay. I've got our details here. There's our website address. You've got contact details from us from emails. But before we do wrap up and let you get back to enjoying the beautiful weather, has anybody got any questions?
Cordy, we have Cordy there.
Yes, Cordy, please.
Cordy, can I just check which
Can
school
you
your
hear
children?
me?
Yeah, we can. And Cordy, which school are you linked with? Just out of interest, or your children linked with?
My daughter goes to Oakfield Academy
Great. Thank you so much.
in
Over to you.
Frome,
Yeah,
Somerset.
great. Thank you.
That's all right. Yeah. So just a sort of a question, and also raising awareness really of the smartphone free childhood movement. I'm sure you guys have heard of them, but just to everybody on here who's concerned around the encroaching kind of technology in our children's lives. Smartphone free childhood is a movement started by parents, and it's just got a lot of really useful information around all of this stuff. It's a very non-judgmental space. There's lots of parents there whose children already have smartphones, but just sort of helping us all to navigate this, how quickly everything's changing. I was just wondering as well, when you say that you do workshops in schools, is that something that do you have to be invited by school staff, or can you have you had parents kind of organise that? I was just wondering because as much as I think that there is support by staff, there also seems so busy and overrun. I often wonder if it would happen quicker if I just got a bunch of parents to say we want this to happen and we can invite you into the school. I'm just wondering how it works.
So it usually gets organised through school, but if you wanted to have a conversation with us on behalf of a group of parents, we can certainly do that. But very often the school might be interested in a range of other things that we can support them with as well, including supervision and staff training. Sometimes we get invited to do some sessions with governors or do a review of things. And the more people do with us, because of economies of scale, the kind of more cost effective we can make it as well. So I'm very happy to have a conversation with you about that, Cordy, or indeed the school if you want to link us in. And yeah, please do send us a message. You've got our email, you've got my email address and our website link in the chat. You might not have chat immediately there if you're joining on mobile, but send us a message if you like, however's easiest for you, via Facebook, LinkedIn, or via the website, and we'll be very glad to have a further conversation.
Okay, thank you so much. It's been really
great. Thank you. Wonderful. And then we've got Nicola.
Hi, I was just wondering if you have any strategies for de-radicalization, or of places you can turn to if you know of a child, even if it's not your own, who you think may be struggling a bit with online radicalization.
Yeah, I do. Now, it depends on what level it's at. What we would normally say is if we believe that a young person rather than an adult, for argument's sake, a young person is becoming sucked into a group or organization, it might be a requirement to contact the prevent team. It may have gone too far. But one of the things which we've been invited to support with is where particularly young males have started to, and I'm on about teenagers predominantly, have started to discuss disrespectful attitudes towards females and really starting to idolize key figures from the manosphere, such as Andrew Tate. We've been invited to go in and have conversations in school, open kind of discussion workshops where we encourage the young lads to say exactly what they're thinking, not what they think we want to hear, but what they are really thinking. And then we can explore that in a lot more detail and where those ideas are coming from, why those thoughts are there, how they're feeling, how they would like to feel, and strategies for getting them to feel better. So we do some of that work, both in terms of early intervention, but can support longitudinally as well, unless we believe that they're not very many steps away from being pretty pivotally involved in a pretty extreme group, in which case it's beyond what we can reasonably support with, and it goes to prevent.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hmm.
Any other thoughts or questions?
I think I'm the only man on this this thing, which is it's sort of vaguely awkward, but but I don't know. No. Having gone through teenage years myself, and I've got 3 sons, and 2 of which are through this, and they're in their 30s now. I can say that whilst it's absolutely wrong, the misogyny is wrong. I can see just little inklings of where it comes from, in actual reality. That sense of hopelessness when it comes to romantic chase that has been around for a long time. It's not absolutely. It just seems accentuated by the internet. Does that make any sense?
It
Yes.
absolutely does. I don't think this idea is anything that's new. I think it's just something that maybe we would have sat with. Whereas now there's a community online that feeds into that, and it becomes something that may have been quite fleeting. And I say that respectfully, it could have been 6 months, 12 months, 5 years, but fleeting in the terms of, our lives. But actually now it's something that people really identify with online. And obviously that familiarity breeds the contempt online, doesn't it? And we're being told that no, you're completely right to feel this way, and I feel this way too. Isn't it outrageous? And this needs to stop. And I think that's maybe what's different now.
I also think there's such a massive focus on how people look. If you think about all of the social media platforms many of us will be on, it's like an arms race as to who's got the best photos, who's having the most fun, who's in the most beautiful destination, who, if you're a teenager, has kind of got the best look, the best trainers, the best tout, and all of that stuff. And there is a lot of visual and marketing pressure on young people and adults around lifestyle. And I think some of those things which maybe if you could close the door on at 5:30 when we were younger, they're carrying all of that stuff around. And it depends what we carry around, isn't it? I mean, I myself, I adore, many of the things which happen on my phone in terms of friends, family, sense of connection with other people. I see this as a wholly positive thing. But actually, if I were looking at that and feeling like I were looking at images from a place of poor self-esteem, not feeling good enough, feeling like I'm missing out, that I can't compete, that things are fairly hopeless, then this becomes not a device for connection, but a device for torment. So, as with so many things, it depends how we're looking at the world and literally what we're carrying with us, either in terms of joy or burden.
I mean, in terms of TV and film and stuff, which is also input for children, they're watching. Rarely see the heroines of a TV or a film program as anything other than really stereotypically beautiful and actually really out of your league as a
Mm.
teenager. They're out of your league, aren't they? You're not. It's hopeless, and
Yeah.
yet they are the kind of the icons really of it. You and the film producers and the TV producers are going to do select attractive looking women, but they're attractive women visually
Yeah.
predominantly.
Yeah.
You're going to get this thing, which is that the most powerful women are the most attractive women, and they're going to need an attractive boy to go out with if they're going to date. I mean, I can, so it's not that that's right, but it's coming from this other angle of film and TV as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
magazines, if you look at Vogue, you're not going to go flick through Vogue. You're not going to see an ordinary girl. You're not going to see somebody that looks like the girl and sits next to you in the class, at school, are you? Not really. I mean,
No,
and which is sad, isn't it? Do you think it's sad? It's kind of sad.
it is sad. And Emma and I were having a conversation the other day about what's the name of that injection? Ozempic, Emma.
Yeah, we
Yes,
were.
and the backlash that is coming against the images which were starting to be used of women of all shapes and sizes in modeling, and now that there is an injection at the ready which can, get rid of melt weight away very easily, irrespective of what we do not know about long-term consequence. Will there be a backlash against people who don't look perfect anymore, because the question could be posed, well, you've got no excuse not to. We've got to be really careful in the pressures people are facing, young and old alike.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Could I
Mm.
could I ask just
Yeah.
regarding this topic, is it being included in PSHE in secondary schools? We have a son in year 6, which is why we're interested particularly in this subject, but we also have a daughter in secondary, actually in year 11. And I'm conscious that they do a lot of PSHE, and I just wondered if it's been updated, the curriculum to discuss this in secondary schools. I imagine it has.
So PSHE
No, they
very
put it
much.
out.
Oh, if you're not muted at the moment, apart from Fenella, it'd be great if you could mute yourselves. That's brilliant. Thank you. So PSHE must include relationships, and not only relationships which are romantic relationships, but how we are relationally with others as well, in
Mm.
terms of inclusion and equity and so on. There won't necessarily be a prescription that incel specifically must be covered, but if I were the teacher with a PSHE curriculum to deliver right now, in a secondary school, I would definitely be thinking, well, I would want to as well, but I have to cover inclusion, I have to cover gender, I have to cover protected characteristics and relationships, and some degree of sex education and interplay between people from a non-platonic perspective. I, I don't know how I could avoid it.
Yeah,
And many secondary schools in particular, a few primary, but predominantly secondary, contact us for advice around the manosphere, which is promoted by Andrew Tate. So
Mm.
they are, many of them, having those conversations. It's worth you asking, in particular for the secondary school,
Yeah,
but it would almost be hard for them to avoid it.
yeah,
I would dare to say they're being remiss if they don't cover it within an 18-month to 2-year period.
sure. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hmm.
Good. And thank you, Amy, for sharing that link. That is very, very helpful. I'm going to make sure I copy and paste that now and send that to myself. Good. Do we have any other comments or questions? I have just one thing I'd like to alert to. If any of you are able to 5th of June around boundaries and keeping our children safe, particularly outside of school and safe outside. We're going to start that slightly earlier at 5 p.m. on that occasion, and we will make sure that schools have got that so that they can promote the slightly revised time only for that final session. But I thought I'd mention it here as well. And I've shared links to our website. Please do stay in touch on either Facebook, LinkedIn, or via our website, and we can keep you fully posted on all of the things that we're doing. And we try wherever possible to offer up some free resources as well. We've got the blog, which Emma has particularly been keeping on our behalf online. And any questions that you might have, please just ask, and we will always seek to help as much as we can.
Cool.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. And if there were any of you who hadn't yet shared with us which school you're linked with, I think, Gwyn, I'm not sure I've got yours, or Donna. It's just really handy for us to know which organisation you've come routed via this evening, so that we can track how well we're doing on our communications and working with schools and other organisations to get the message out. So if you can pop that in the chat, that would be brilliant. And otherwise, if there isn't anything else, we shall wish you a lovely rest of this very warm evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Want to stop the recording, Trudy?
Yes, that would be a good idea, wouldn't it? Thank